Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we're taking a really fascinating look under the hood of artificial intelligence. But we're not focusing on how smart AI agents are right now.
Oh,
We're asking a much deeper question. How do we design them to be inherently better at adapting, more effective at, exploring, and just fundamentally good at evolving?
that is exactly the crux of it. We're unpacking a crucial study on something called evolvability in neuroevolution. And you should think of evolvability as sort of the AI's future genetic potential.
Okay.
Specifically, it's defined as the capacity of an individual solution, that's the genotype, the neural network's parameters, to produce offspring with mutually diverse behaviors.
The phenotypes.
The phenotypes, exactly.
Yeah.
It's really a measure of how effectively an AI can use mutation to explore all the possibilities of its own behavior.
So our mission today is to analyze the structure of that exploration space, what the researchers are calling the behavior landscape. We really need to understand why some solutions are, well, evolutionary gold mines and others are just dead ends. And to do that, we'll look at some new metrics they've designed to measure this evolvability precisely. And we'll see how these disruptive search algorithms, the ones designed just to seek out novelty, how they actually influence this core capability.
Before we jump into the landscape itself,
Yeah.
maybe let's set the context. I mean, when most people think about training deep reinforcement learning agents,
Yeah.
they're thinking of canonical gradient-based algorithms, right? The AI just keeps tweaking itself to climb some fitness hill.
Yeah, that's the standard model.
But we're focusing on something else, these divergent search algorithms. So why do they even exist? What's the problem they're trying to solve?
Well, gradient-based methods are fantastic when you have a smooth, a clearly marked path to the goal. But they completely fall apart in a couple of scenarios. First, when the reward is sparse.
I mean, you only get feedback at the very end. Exactly. Say you only get credit if you finish a 100-step task. And second is when the landscape is deceptive, where the local peaks, the things that look good nearby, actually lead you away from the best overall solution. Divergent search algorithms, they just sidestep that whole problem by prioritizing broad, meaningful exploration over just climbing the nearest hill.
Okay, and I understand these divergent methods themselves kind of break down into two main philosophies.
Precisely. First up, you've got novelty search, or NS, and this is the radical approach. It often completely abandons the objective reward function.
It just doesn't care about the score.
It doesn't care at all. It just says, I want to find something new. And novelty is judged by comparing a behavior to everything the population is doing now and everything it has done in the past, which is all stored in an archive. It's
Okay.
just exploration for its own sake.
So novelty search is like a bored explorer who just wants to see something no one has ever seen before, even if that new territory is totally useless.
That's a perfect analogy. And then you have the second family, quality diversity, or QD. Sometimes they're called illumination algorithms.
And they're more pragmatic, I take it.
Much more. They try to balance the objective, quality, and behavioral diversity. So the goal isn't just to find the single best solution. It's to discover this massive set of diverse, high-performing solutions that occupy every possible niche of the behavior space. They literally try to illuminate the whole map.
That transition, that brings us right to the concept the researchers were mapping the behavior landscape. We should probably clarify the biological language they adapted here. What do we mean when we say genotype and phenotype for an AI?
Right, so we're translating biology into engineering. The genotype is just the code. It's the neural network itself, all the parameters, all the weights.
Okay, the blueprint.
The blueprint, exactly. Then the phenotype is the resulting behavior vector. And the connection between them, that's the behavior function. It's simply the mathematical mapping from those weights to the resulting observable behavior.
So what does that observable behavior actually look like in practice for an AI?
In a lot of these evolutionary robotics examples, like the one in this paper, the behavior descriptor can be extremely simple. It could just be the final position of a robot's body or maybe the end of its arm.
Right.
If the task is to move a block, the behavior might just be the X and Y coordinates of that block when the simulation stops. That 2D point, that's the entire behavior vector.
Okay, so if the behavior landscape is an abstraction of that mapping, the relationship between tweaking the network weights and seeing where the block ends up, how is that different from the traditional fitness landscape we usually talk about?
That's a great question. The fitness landscape maps weights to performance, to a score, and its difficulty is measured by ruggedness, local peaks and steep valleys that trap you.
Right.
The behavior landscape is different. Ruggedness isn't inherently bad here. In fact, it could be good because it means small changes in the network can lead to very diverse behavior, which is exactly what we want for exploration.
We're not looking for the single highest peak anymore. We're looking for maximum coverage and, I guess, smooth paths between different diverse regions.
Exactly. A behavior landscape is only difficult if the search algorithm struggles to access certain regions, if there are these inaccessible behavioral pockets. But here's the really crucial insight.
Okay.
While the fitness function in novelty search is always changing, because what's novel depends on what you've seen recently, the behavior landscape itself, the map from weights to behaviors, that's static.
Ah, so it doesn't change unless you change the whole environment or the agent's brain structure.
Correct. And that static nature, that's what makes it so much easier to analyze in detail, which is what these researchers did. They could actually study its geometry without worrying about the ground shifting under their feet.
Okay, so if we want to study the quality of this exploration scientifically, we need precise ways to measure it. The paper introduced two related but distinct metrics.
They did. The first one is called local sensitivity. This one is pretty straightforward. It just measures the maximum behavioral distance you can get from a single step 1 mutation away from your current solution.
So a high local sensitivity means you can make one tiny tweak to the neural network.
And potentially get a massive disruptive change in behavior. It's all about the single greatest leap that's available to you from where you are.
And the second metric, this is the one they're actually calling evolvability.
Right. And evolvability is, it's far more comprehensive. Instead of just looking at that one single greatest leap, it measures the maximum spread of all the possible behaviors among all the offspring generated by a mutation.
So it's like the diameter of the whole cluster of potential children.
You can think of it exactly like that. High evolvability means that pretty much any mutation you choose will reliably produce a broad range of diverse new solutions. It measures the total potential spread, not just one lucky shot.
So local sensitivity is your potential for a massive single jump breakthrough. And evolvability is more like the assurance of broad, useful diversity. They should probably align, but they're measuring different things.
They are. And because evolvability requires you to evaluate a large sample of all potential neighbors to calculate that spread, it is computationally very expensive. But it gives you a much truer picture of a solution's potential.
And this is where the landscape starts to reveal its tricky spots. The researchers, they coined a new term for a specific type of solution they found, these deceptively promising ones. They call them dissimila.
Yes.
What exactly defines a dissimila point?
A dissimila solution is characterized by a very small ratio between its evolvability, so its total spread, and its local sensitivity, its single jump potential. They're basically the behavioral equivalent of a local optimum in a classic fitness landscape.
Wait a second. If they have high local sensitivity, that means they can produce at least one super novel child. Doesn't that mean algorithms like novelty search, which are just looking for any novel child, are kind of inherently designed to fall for these things?
That is the essential deceptive flaw. You've hit it exactly. A dissimila point looks great to a novelty algorithm because it produces one very weird, distant child, so it meets the selection criteria. But the fact that its overall evolvability is low means that if you choose that highly novel child, you just hit a behavioral dead end. You made one great jump, but you've landed on a plateau where any future exploration is going to be extremely constrained.
So it's a behavioral cul-de-sac that looks like a superhighway exit. This really reveals a fundamental blind spot in standard novelty search.
It does. And to analyze how algorithms navigate these tricky landscapes, the researchers adapted the concept of walks. These are sequences of decisions that reflect different levels of evolutionary pressure. They basically simulated the evolutionary process under a few different rule sets.
Tell us about those walks.
They define three main types. At the extreme high pressure end, you have the highly selective walk. This simulates maximum selection pressure towards novelty by always choosing the single best child according to whatever novelty criterion you're using.
And then you ease off the gas a bit.
Right. Then you move to the adaptive walk. This represents an intermediate pressure. Here, it chooses any random child that just surpasses a certain novelty threshold. It's more of a good enough to proceed mindset. It reflects a population that's evolving but isn't, hyper obsessed with maximizing every single jump.
And what was the control group?
That was a random walk. Here, the algorithm just accepts any neighbor uniformly. It doesn't care about novelty or fitness. This simulates conditions with absolutely no evolutionary pressure, just drifting. And by comparing these three, they could systematically study how that pressure influences evolvability.
Before we get into the results, how did the study actually test this? What was the setup?
They used a standard but pretty robust evolutionary robotics task. It's called the fetch, pick, and place environment. And this involves a 7 degree of freedom robotic arm trying to pick up and move a block.
And crucially, they ignored the human-defined goal.
Completely. The purpose was just to study the diversity of movement, not whether it successfully completed the task. So the behavior descriptor was just the final position of the block on the table. The AI itself was a shallow, feed-forward neural network.
And what about the mutation operator?
They use a specific one called the Cauchy distribution.
We don't need the math, but what does that mean in plain English?
It just means the mutation operator usually made small, incremental tweaks to the network weights. But occasionally, it would generate a massive disruptive leap. And this is actually key for successful exploration because it lets the agent break out of established behavioral ruts when it gets stuck.
So what did the comparison of those 3 pressure walks actually reveal?
Result number 1. They found a very, very strong positive correlation between evolvability and the level of evolutionary pressure they applied. The actual statistical coefficient was R equals 1.7106, which is highly significant. This isn't just a slight trend, it's a really solid finding.
So if the random walk starts with the same potential, but its evolvability just degrades over time, while the selective walks maintain or even enhance theirs, what does that tell us?
It tells us that actively selecting for novelty isn't just about finding new things. It is a fundamental engine for adaptation itself. If you let the process just drift, like in the random walk, the population starts to cluster in these genetically constrained regions. It actually loses the capacity for those big, useful breakthroughs.
So novelty search works because it's relentlessly forcing the evolutionary mechanism to preserve its own capacity for future divergence.
That's a powerful way to put it. It confirms that the pressure to explore is literally what prevents the population from getting genetically stuck.
And they also looked at the metrics themselves, right? How we judge what's novel in the first place.
Yes. Moving beyond pressure, they investigated the metric. They compared traditional methods like k-nearest neighbors KNN, which just measures the distance to the closest points you've already explored.
Yeah.
They compared that against a novel Gaussian kernel density estimation-based metric.
Okay, what was the practical difference there? This is where the choice of metric really starts to shape the landscape, I imagine.
It absolutely does. And this was result number 2. The Gaussian kernel density estimate proved to be superior. It yielded consistently higher mean evolvability values over the walks. And the reason lies in how they map out unexplored space.
How so?
Well, imagine you've explored 2 points on an island, point A and point B. A K&N metric will tell you where the edge of your explored territory is. It'll push you to the point that's farthest from either A or B.
Right. It favors the boundary.
It favors the boundary. But the Gaussian kernel density estimate, it measures how dense your exploration has been. It will actually favor the point exactly in the middle between A and B because that is the region where density is lowest. It's not just finding the edge of the map, it's encouraging exploration right into the heart of the genuinely empty, unvisited continent.
That makes the distinction perfectly clear. The metric itself defines what novel actually means to the algorithm.
By prioritizing those truly empty regions, it just results in higher overall evolvability.
Now, let's transition to what I thought was the most forward-looking proposal in the paper. The idea that all our current evolvability metrics are too myopic, short-sighted.
Yeah, they are short-sighted. Because definitions like local sensitivity and even our current definition of evolvability, they only consider the immediate next generation of offspring. They just look one step ahead.
But 2 solutions could look the same one step out.
Exactly. Solution A and Solution B might have identical coverage in generation 1, but B's children might be far more likely to produce even more diverse behaviors 2, 3, 4 generations down the line.
So we need a metric that accounts for that future potential. The downstream utility of a solution as a good starting point. We need long-sightedness.
Which brings us to their novel concept, well-evolvability. This is designed for behavior spaces that you've broken up into discrete niches or, a grid. A solution is more evolvable if its descendants up to the dollars generation, where the dollars is that long-sightedness parameter, end up visiting a greater number of those niches.
So we're looking for these hidden niches that don't necessarily generate massive leaps right away, but they serve as these incredibly evolvable starting points. The wormholes, as the researchers call them.
That's a term, yeah.
That can generate offspring in really remote or hard-to-reach regions later on.
Are these wormholes rare? I mean, is the search for the long evolvability an inherently more difficult optimization problem? They're likely rare, yes. And it definitely makes the optimization significantly harder because you can't judge the quality of a solution immediately. You have to predict its future utility. So to make this prediction practical, the researchers proposed an estimation method using Markov chains.
Okay, let's break down the Markov chain approach. How does that work?
So first you divide the entire behavior space into that grid of niches. Then, and this is the key part, using your previous exploration data, you estimate something called the transition matrix $2.
And what is that?
This matrix is basically a map of the behavioral highways. If you're in niche dollars, the matrix $2 tells you the probability that a mutation will lead you into niche dollar.
So $2 shows the mutual reachability of all the different behavioral neighborhoods. It's a connectivity map.
It's a connectivity map, exactly. Once you have that matrix, you can construct a Markov chain. And by taking simulated random walks of length dollars plus dollars, starting from any candidate solution, they can calculate the likely coverage, the total number of unique niches visited over denition generations.
So it's a predictive metric for long-term evolvability, but you don't have to run a full multi-generational simulation in real time to check every single candidate.
Right. Although it's worth noting that in its current form, this method does require a good amount of initial exploration just to accurately estimate that transition matrix in the first place.
This research has given us a fascinating new vocabulary and a new toolkit for really understanding the architecture of AI potential. Let's just quickly recap the three main takeaways for the listener.
Okay. First, we established that evolvability is strongly promoted by increasing evolutionary pressure. Novelty search isn't just about finding novel things. It's about forcing the evolutionary process to preserve its capacity for future diversity.
Right, to avoid getting genetically stuck.
Exactly. Second, we saw that the Gaussian kernel density estimation is a highly effective metric for measuring novelty. It's superior to simpler distance metrics because it encourages that genuinely deep exploration into the least visited regions of the behavior space.
And finally, the long-term view. The structure of the behavior landscape itself. Specifically, that niche-to-niche reachability that's captured by the transition matrix $2. That should be the target of our attention for truly long-term evolvability. We need to be searching for the wormholes.
And that takes us to our final provocative thought. This current work focuses on making our solutions more evolvable. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, this raises a really important question. What if we take this whole search for evolvability a step further and try to optimize for meta-evolvability? Meaning, what if we encode the parameters of the mutation operator's distribution itself into the genotype? So instead of just searching for the best network weights.
The evolutionary algorithm would also be discovering the best way to mutate those weights.
Yes, it wouldn't just be finding the best behaviors. It would be discovering the best strategy for evolving those behaviors for that specific environment.
So the search would be through the space of heuristics. The AI would be optimizing its own evolutionary process.
Precisely. And that might unlock mechanisms that enhance evolvability in ways we haven't even conceived of yet, allowing future generations of AI to truly accelerate their own capacity for adaptation. Something for you to mull over until our next deep dive.